Hello, everyone. This is Nick Cacco from BMA, along with my colleague,
Mike DeLuca. Good morning.
Welcome to our first 2022 webinar. First thing I want to do is the quick technical check. Can you see us? Can you hear us? Can you see the screen with the presentation? In the question box, just type yes if you can, if a few people could do that. All right, we're in good shape. I'll get moving. All right, so today we're going to talk about creating a lean performance measurement system. If you want to get a copy of today's presentation, it is in the handout section of your control panel. And by some chance, if you don't do that, or you're listening to this recording, please email me and I'll be glad to send you a copy of the presentation. The other administrative task, if you are a certified public accountant and you would like continuing education credit for attending this webinar, which is 1 hour, you have 3 requirements. You have to attend the live event, be logged in for 50 minutes, and respond to the 3 attendance check questions that will pop up. And again, at the conclusion of the presentation, if you'd like the certificate, please email me and I'll get those out to you in a few days. All right, so let's get started. So our agenda and learning objectives, what do we want you to get out of this webinar? First is to be able to explain the primary differences between lean measurements and traditional measurements. Companies measure, they measure a lot of things, but not all those measures are effective lean measures. And we'll talk about this throughout the next hour. Understand the basic practices of a lean performance measurement system. There's sort of like fundamental practices that need to be employed. We want you to be able to define typical relevant lean performance measures. What should you measure in your lean company? And then finally, be able to explain the steps in the linkage chart process, which is a methodology to create a lean, integrated set of lean performance measurements. So what's the current state? Traditional measurements, traditional metrics. First of all, there's too many. Like I said, companies measure and they like to measure everything. And here's an interesting exercise. If you have some time, try to do an inventory in your company of how many measurements you have. I did this once at a company, and in one location they came up with like 160 measurements in their one location. Secondly, most traditional metrics are used for reporting purposes. It's just reporting numbers, and typically the measurements get reported up. Third characteristic is basic, sort of focused on financial outcomes. And a lot of these measures are used to try to explain financial results. And finally, traditional measurement systems are typically top-down. The measures go up the organization, and then come down the organization comes sort of initiatives, policies, changes that have to be made. That there's a lot of companies that use dashboards, and the sort of the concept of the dashboard is, I'm an owner, I'm a CEO, and I can get bang, bang, bang on my computer screen, key indicators that tells me how the business is running. The other aspect of traditional measurements is they are not usually lean focused. So the future state, we're not just talking about numbers that are measures. We're talking about an integrated system. And there are 4 pieces to the system, and all need to be developed. First is what are the lean performance measurements? What are those measurements that support lean practices, support continuous improvement, and basically align themselves with a lean business strategy? Second characteristic is ownership. Lean performance measures are process focused. So the process teams, the managers and that manage processes, they own the measures. It's their measure, they report it, they use it. Third characteristic is visual display. All the measures are visible in the company, ideally on performance boards. Now, people again are sort of think counterintuitively about this. Why can't we put the measures just on a computer screen that everybody can look at? You know, put them on nice displays. And there's an element of the idea of actually writing down the measure on a board or updating a graph that creates this ownership and creates this tactileness of this measure is mine and it's important. The final aspect of a lean performance measurement system, it is used for PDCA purposes, identifying problems, also measuring improvement. The idea of this, and this again is somewhat counterintuitive, the idea of lean performance measurements is that it reveals the problems and issues. It makes them all visible, okay? And then we can solve those problems. So that's what the future state looks like and what you need to strive for. So just to compare systems really fast, traditional measurement systems or conventional measurement systems and lean measurement systems. Look at different aspects, and you can use this sort of like as a grid or a self-evaluation tool. You know, where does your company stand in terms of its measurement system? If you look at reporting, do you mainly report outcome-based measures that are financially focused, or are the measures real-time reporting? Okay, sort of outcome-based measures, the analogy is we're looking in the rear view mirror. That's what's past us as we're driving. Real-time reporting is we're looking at the dashboard in the car or in the GPS system, and we're trying to, you know, reach a destination. The focus, is the focus financial or is the focus operational in terms of the measurements? How are the measures used? Simply for reporting, or are they used to inform decision making? You know, and do the users of the measures actually incorporate them into analytical practices? Who uses the measures? Top management or frontline managers? What is being measured? Are we sort of looking at functional performance, or are we looking at overall process performance, like the performance of a value stream? Excuse me. And finally, how many measures do you have? Too many, or in any part of the company, doesn't matter where you're looking, do you have anywhere only 5 to 7 measures? That's really where you want to get. So that wraps up the introduction. And let's do our first attendance check. And let me launch this poll. Right? I'll give you about 30 seconds. Mike, did you want to add anything before I move on while they're
I
doing
think we'll get into some more of the specifics about the points that you've made as we talk about the practices and the specific types of measures.
Okay. All righty. I'm going to close the poll. I'm not going to share the results because this is, oh, I shared them anyway. Hold on. Hide results. All right. We're back. All right. Let us continue. So what are the basic practices of a lean performance measurement system? And think of this as a way to guide the development. Here's another aspect of this. You're building a new system. Okay, you are one, and this is what a lot of companies don't really get. You're not going to keep all the other measures you use and add these. This is more about sort of rationalization of your measurement system and only using the measures that are relevant and reliable, and at one level, discarding all the others. So that's important for people to understand. So what's the purpose of lean performance measurements? Okay, think of these as, think of the actual performance measurements as tools that help you learn. Okay, what do you want to learn? First of all, you want process teams or value streams or cells to be able to learn how to execute against a standard. And I'm going to use a simple performance measurement, which we'll talk about later. Schedule attainment. Okay, what's the plan for today in terms of what we have to produce, whether it's a product or whether it's delivering services or whether it's performing tasks in accounts payable? Doesn't matter. You know, what's the plan? Okay, that's the standard. And scheduled attainment is what's the actual compared to the plan. Did we execute? If we didn't, why not? That is the correct area. You know, how do we learn how to identify and eliminate deviations from some standard? So if the plan, for example, was to produce 100 units and we only produced 90 today, why? Do we understand why? And then the third purpose of a measure is to improve, the idea of striving for a new standard. So if we're capable of producing 100 units a day, and that's the standard, how can we improve to produce 110 units a day? What I always say to companies about performance measurements is that it's okay if you don't meet the standard, if you can explain why. But if you don't meet the standard and you cannot explain why, there's an issue. So there's also different measurement cycles. Okay. And look at this. You can look at this sort of in different dimensions. You can look at this monthly, weekly, daily. You can look at this as what part of the company is being measured. You can also look at what the purpose of the measure is. And actually, I'm going to work from right to left rather than left to right. I probably need to change this slide at some point. So if you start on the right, you know, daily or hourly measures, we're looking at very discrete measures. Every day is a new day, or every hour is a new hour. And you're looking at specific cells or specific processes. Are we meeting standards? And you typically have 3 to 5 to 7 measures there. The weekly measures are done more at the overall value stream level to focus on, is the value stream improving over time? 5 to 7 basic measures. Then you have the monthly measures, which are done at the company level or the business unit level, typically, you know, senior leadership teams. They're assessing the overall initiatives And is the lean strategy working? Many times, senior leaders will say, well, I'd like to know what's going on in the cell, or I'd like to know what's going on in the value stream. And Mike, how do you answer them?
Go and see.
Yeah, go and see.
Yeah.
Okay, the leaders of the company, they have to change their expectations from send me the reports to I need to get out of my office and I need to attend these meetings and look at or do Gemba walks and look at the visual boards to get a flavor.
And I think one of the reasons that these measurement cycles are so important, because what we're trying to do, and Nick, you talked about this, is really shift measurement so that more and more and more it is supporting the purpose that it needs to support. And in lean measurements, like you said, we're trying to avoid looking in the rearview mirror to say, oh, that's what happened. We're trying to look at what's happening now so that we still have the opportunity to influence or improve the outcome while there's still time. So as you look at these daily or hourly measures, and one of the reasons that we really want executives to go and see instead of asking for a report is because we want to make sure that the teams that are operating doing the work, doing the value-added work for customers, have the right measurement and the right tools to inform improvement. So Nick, your schedule attainment measure, we're checking that not at the end of the day, because that's then a daily rear view mirror. We're checking that, what's the plan at the beginning of the day? How many units we need to produce 100 today? So partway through the shift, are we on track? And are we getting the information we need? That's why hourly sometimes is really important. So these need to inform the companies and the company's ability to sense and respond or understand performance while there's still time to improve the outcome or attain the result. And think about that as you think about what's the right frequency.
Yeah, good, thanks. And finally, the last aspect of practices is teams owning their measures. What does this mean? They self-monitor. Okay, they self-report. The idea of a lean performance measurement is that it should be so simple and easy to calculate that they can calculate it on their own. Now, in some cases, sometimes numbers have to come out of systems, but in that case, you would want every team to have access to the system to pull their own number rather than wait for example, accounting and finance to send them a report. They self-report the measures on the boards. They use them in daily huddles. They use them as learning tools. Do we understand the problems and issues in our business? And can we drive to the root cause of the measure's performance to understand how we can improve? And if that's how you need to get the measurement set up, get the measurement system set up. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Mike, and he's going to get into some details on the actual lean performance measurements.
Sure, and as we're doing that, as we're getting into these categories, Nick, you mentioned a little while ago, and then again just a few seconds ago, about understanding why. And I think for me, contrasting my own experience in leading a conventional measurement system and then shifting to a lean measurement system, we always explained why, right? Even when we were looking at conventional measures in the rearview mirror, there was always a good and thoughtful variance analysis. And I think we're focusing our explanation or our understanding of why in the lean measurement system on real-time problem solving. So Nick, when you said a little bit ago, understand what was the plan, what's the actual, and make the variance or the gap visible, it's important to understand why. From the perspective of those purposes that you talked about, we want to either execute to the plan, correct our ability to execute to the plan, or improve our performance to a higher standard. So let's talk about some of these categories as we're thinking about what, as you're assessing your current measurement system and saying, do we have, the right measure in the right place? Is it being used in the right way at the right frequency? There are a number of different categories that that we encourage you to be attentive to. And we've got 7 here, and these are categories that really help understand from the perspective both of customer value, from the perspective of how effective is the work for the staff that are doing it, and from the perspective of what are the company's outcomes. Do we have the right measures in the right place to inform meeting plan and improving? So we'll talk about each of these more specifically with some examples, but delivery is really, is the customer getting what they need by when they expect it or by when our commitment is? So let's go into some specific examples, and we'll share examples from different industries as we each go into these. For delivery, are customers getting orders on time? And this is something I'm actually working with an organization right now on their whole customer delivery process. And there are some aspects of the delivery process that may be within your company's control, and there may be some that are due to that are out of your hands. If you've now loaded a container onto a ship and it's going transatlantic or trans-Pacific, it's still important to understand from the perspective of your measurement system, you know, what's the lead time, and you might need to break it down to understand where are there needs for improvement, but where do we have direct control versus influence. So it's important when you're doing measurement to really understand, to really design it in a way that helps you understand where and how you can affect change or improvement. From a services perspective, did the customer get their service on time? If you're checking into a hotel, are all the rooms ready on time in order to be checked in whenever your check-in time is? For accounting, it's important for us to think about the timeliness of our services. Did we complete reports on time? Are vendors getting paid on time? Are customers getting bills in a timely fashion? And then we've included healthcare in here as well as a contrast to manufacturing. Delivery is really important in an industry like healthcare, where access to services has a very important, you know, safety consideration. So those are examples of on-time delivery, and many of those can be measured on a shift by shift or day by day basis, right? And really actively managed at the front line. So let's talk about quality. And like it says here, it's the customer's perspective on what's value added versus not. And so a defect is from the perspective of the end customer. And in manufacturing, and we're looking at defects typically as a ratio. How many items were produced, and out of those items, how many required rework, or potentially even got all the way to the customer with an issue that needed to be addressed or resolved. So examples in all of these industries. Let's think a little bit about the work that we do in accounting and finance. For those of you who are accounting and finance leaders or practitioners, a lot of the work that we do includes correction cycles and correction steps. And to Nick's point earlier, making these visible, having the team start to really track on a daily basis, how often am I correcting things just as part of the natural process, in order to get the work done, in order to pay the vendor, in order to invoice the customer, in order to move forward with closing the books at the end of the month, and really challenging ourselves to think, no, it's important to understand how often these are happening and why these are happening, so that we can eliminate them. These are not the best use of the organization's and the employees' time. So defects are a really important regular measure to monitor and understand the root causes and in order to be able to improve and reduce those. Lead time is also, this is really significant from the perspective of the overall time it takes for a customer to get the product or service that they've requested or that they've contracted for. So in manufacturing, how long does it take to complete an order? And I think it's important to think about lead time from the perspective of so much of lead time it potentially includes waiting time. And it's very, very helpful to make that visible. If the beginning of a production process to the end of a production process may have a number of days or even weeks in order to complete an order, and yet the active time that you're working on value-added work to produce that product might be a small fraction of the overall time. So looking at the overall lead time helps us really make visible, whether it's manufacturing, service, or healthcare, how much is active time versus how much is waiting or non-value-added time. And we can also do the same thing from the perspective of finance and accounting, because if you were to think about the average day of someone in finance and accounting, our schedules. Our schedules are very full. We have a lot of work to do. And one of the things that's hard to make visible is the lead time on a particular process, because an accounting specialist or a finance analyst might be working on a report and then not have what they need to work on that report. So they're going to shift their focus to another project, or they're going to shift their focus to doing some period reconciliations. There's always work to be done. So we're constantly or often shifting from one process to the next. And this is true of nurses in healthcare. It's true of individuals in service industries. And since we're managing multiple processes at a time, we lose insight into what the actual wait or delay or downtime is for each of those processes that are contributing potentially to a significant lead time. Productivity is based on how much capacity we have, how much are we able to produce. And it's really helpful to look at productivity from the perspective of what's getting in the way. And Nick, you said this earlier, if we can produce 100 a day, what would it take to produce 110? Not from the perspective of folks need to work harder, but from the perspective of assessing what is getting in the way. So out of that entire work day, how many units are able to be produced, how many customers are able to be served, how many invoices are able to be paid, whatever that ratio is. But then to use this as an opportunity to understand what contributes to production versus wasted or not the best use of the time during that day. And if you do that analysis, and Nick, you've got some great spreadsheets with actual case examples, when you actually do that analysis, you might learn that less than 50% of the time of the individual is spent during the day is actually focused on that productive work, and a lot of it is waste from the lean perspective. Not that the employee is wasting their time, but that the activities that they're busy doing are waste from a lean perspective. So just like, and we can go on to the next one, but just like all of these measures, we're measuring from the perspective of wanting to learn. So if you're measuring something and you ask yourself, what am I able to learn from this measure? And the answer isn't clear, then it's a good opportunity to think differently about how is the measure structured or calculated or framed in order to really generate that understanding. Cost, I think you had a quote from Taiichi Ohno, costs exist to be reduced. This is a really important one from the perspective of lean thinking, because and we'll often say lean is not a cost-cutting strategy. At the same time, we want to be really attentive to that the fact that an effective lean strategy should dramatically improve cost and financial position over time. So how do we look at that? And without necessarily needing to get into the weeds, which can be overproduction from our part in finance of trying to analyze every specific improvement event or improvement project, but we can look over time, for example, in manufacturing, what are our cost levels as a percent of sales? And this actually works in a number of different industries, costs as a percent of sales. If you're able to grow what you deliver to customers, your top line revenue over time more quickly than you're growing your cost structure, it's a good indication that your lean improvement efforts at the front line are in aggregate having the intended impact, which we should be creating capacity in order to more effectively serve customers and to serve more customers from a quantity perspective. So what's cost as a percent of sales? What's the average actual cost per service? Accounting, we can look at costs reduction over time as well. Do we have Are we getting late payments from customers? Are we paying vendors late? What are the cost implications? And there are a lot of cost implications of what we do in finance. Nick and I were both working with an organization, this is now probably a couple of years ago, that had regulatory fines due to late vendor payments, right? So there's the actual cost of some of the wastes in our systems. And again, it wasn't that people weren't working hard, it was that the waste in the system made it very, very challenging to make payments on time. So again, cost is something to be looked at from the perspective of what can we learn by monitoring cost over time. Next one.
Safety.
Safety. Last two are safety and morale. So safety, depending on your industry, may be from the perspective of the employee or the perspective both of the employee and the customer, if the customer is involved in receiving the service. So it's important to capture not just incidents, but to have really frank reporting around near misses. And again, since we're trying to use our measurement system to learn, if we can make reporting of near misses, and this may already be part of your organization's measurement and your organization's culture, but it's something that's really helpful to emphasize. If we can make reporting of near misses, just like when we report defects, it's not an opportunity for blame, but it's an opportunity to learn to reduce and potentially eliminate the possibility that that near miss or that defect might happen in the future. So we're looking at incidents, but in particular, things that could have resulted or led to an incident. So one of the things I like to encourage folks to do in safety, and this is true in at least manufacturing and healthcare and maybe other industries as well, certainly construction, it's very true, is what is your current, have you implemented 5S? And are you measuring 5S sustainment? And one of the reasons that looking at 5S as a measure, sort of a prospective measure of safety, is if the workspace is maintaining a high level of 5S attainment, meaning that it's organized in a way that serves the worker well, that can be a contributor to improved safety and less risk of an accident or an incident. So think about what types of things you've done to improve safety, and what are those upstream measures of the actual safe environment, so that we don't even get a near miss, right? We're now actually just monitoring how safe the environment is from the perspective, again, both of the employee and the customer. And so think about, since we talked about wanting to have real-time and prospective measures, think about what you can look at from a safety perspective also that is upstream. And the last one is morale. And this is one that some teams will avoid trying to measure this because sometimes it's not particularly clear how to measure it. But let's think about both proxy measures for morale and respect for people and engagement, and also direct measures. And so you'll see some examples of both here. If we're looking at engaging employees, and if you look, so for example, we talked about productivity earlier. If you were to really do a time study of an employee's day and look at how much of their time is spent on productive work that is first-time quality versus rework, and also look at the other time that they spend, how much of their time is spent engaged in continuous improvement, how much of an employee's time is spent on, and this, for someone like in accounting, how much of your time is spent on professional development. One of the things that we did in my team in finance was, as we created capacity and we freed up time during the week by eliminating waste, we had a very specific block of time that staff would focus on their continued education and professional development, which was something that had never really been easy for folks to do before, because there was so much overburden and so much waste in the work. So how much continuous improvement time, how much time is devoted to professional development, how much time do employees have to do research and development if that's the type of work that they do? or continued learning in their job. And then how much, and then what's the progress in developing new skills? So how effective is your system at cross-training staff to step in and do jobs of other folks where that's appropriate? So what are measures of skills development, and how are you focused on training? So those are somewhat direct, but in some ways proxy measures of engagement. And I would encourage folks to have direct measures as well. And I've seen, teams do this really effectively in a daily stand-up meeting or a daily huddle, which is just to have a very clear question that gauges the temperature of the team. Yes, if you reflect on yesterday, did you feel like you were set up for success or not? Just a binary thing, and to track over time. Or did you feel like you were successful in getting your priority work done yesterday? Or what is your level of confidence that we'll be able to move forward with this particular improvement, high or low? Just some simple checks that you can do in a daily stand-up meeting or a daily huddle to take the temperature of the team, but again, from the perspective of learning and then beginning to address opportunities to make improvements.
All right, great. We're at the attendance check 2. What I'd like to do, Mike, is a couple questions came up during the explanation of the measures. So I'm going to bring the questions up right now since we're on the topic before we move to the linkage chart.
Perfect.
And that way we can just answer them. So one question, Francis said that Taiichi Ono also said that it is our job to basically reduce order to billing lead time. And the question is, where does that fit on the list of lean performance measurements? So,
well, I mean, it's part of the overall lead time. So order to bill or order to cash, that's an overall, an end-to-end lead time of that value stream. And like I said, in manufacturing, that can be days, weeks, or months. It can also be really, so think about it from the perspective of healthcare too, but you have to be really intentional about what's the order in healthcare is potentially the patient calls in with a request for an appointment or something to happen clinically. How long does it take to get all the way to the end of that process? So say, for example, my doctor says we should replace your knee because you've got no cartilage left, your bone on bone. So that might be February 1st. When are you done with your therapy after the knee replacement? Is it a month and a half later, or is it 9 months later? So I think you're right. We have to look at that overall lead time, but then understand what are the contributing pieces across that overall value stream.
Yeah, and we in practical lean accounting, we say that you can measure the lead time of any process, okay? Because it's just the start time to the stop time. And you could measure it from receipt of an order to the collection of the cash. And I think that the key is, though, that when you're measuring lead time, the measure needs to be relevant to the process being measured. And they need to be able to understand, the part of the lead time that they own and how can they change that. Mm-hmm. Another question came about when you were talking about quality, and we explained it's measured through defects. And the question is, isn't there a way to measure customer satisfaction instead? I'm going to take a little crack at this, and then Mike, you can add it too. The idea of measuring quality through defects is that we don't want the customer to discover the defect. So we need to that's why we need to measure defects inside the business. Customer satisfaction can be just the quality, but there can be other aspects of customer satisfaction besides quality. Could be lead time, could be on-time delivery, et cetera, et cetera. Mike, did you want to add anything on that?
I think the only thing that I would add, and it's a good point, we didn't directly address customer experience or customer feedback, that that it's a yes and. You have to look at both. I mean, we have to, like Nick said, we don't want any quality issues to even be visible to the customer. So we need to be looking at that internally. What is our percent either of defects or first time correct or first time through? However, and my organization was really, really good at this. We looked at overall customer satisfaction and had a really good analysis of which customer satisfaction measures were most closely correlated to repeat business or to retention of that customer. And so you want to be able to look at those measures as well. One of the things with quality is I can see quality now. If I'm inside the company, we can look at that day to day, hour to hour, shift by shift. Getting customer feedback is really critical. It is lagged and requires some analysis and some interpretation. So again, for me, it's a both and, but we want our lean measures to be as real-time and actionable as possible.
Okay, great. So I put up the attendance check while Mike was talking, and I'm going to close that poll and go back to the presentation. And we're going to move on to the linkage chart. And then there might be a few other questions we'll get to at the end. All right, so one of the methods that we have used over the years to help companies develop a lean performance measurement system is what we call the linkage chart process. And I'm going to sort of go over it at a very high level, but it's a methodology, or it's a process to help a company identify those relevant measures. It also creates ownership through the linkage chart process, and I'll explain that in a second. The other thing that the linkage chart does is it links strategy to goals to measures. And then from there, it helps with the actions, because the actions have to move the measures in the right direction to move the measure towards the goal, and the goals are all aligned to the strategy or business objectives. And finally, it's also a method to rationalize your current performance measurements. It's a really interesting way to understand, which measures that we may have are lean focused, which measures do we have today that are not lean focused that we may need to discard or stop using. All right, so I'm gonna put up what I call the eye chart. It's a linkage chart, and I'm going to go through very quickly sort of the development process. How do you have to think through this? You begin with, what are the strategies of the company? Okay, and again, these are lean focused strategies. From there, how is the company going to measure whether these, the strategic goals are being achieved? So the idea here, these are like the monthly measures, okay? We talked about the 5 to 7 measures. And then what we do is we link them through by connecting the strategies to the measurements. Oh, by the way, this is just, as you're doing this, or I'm sorry, as I'm presenting this, think about doing this with Post-it notes on a wall in your office, because that's the way we actually, when we're working with a company, that's the way we do it, okay? Secondly, the next step is, okay, we have the strategic measurements, so what are the goals of the value stream? What does the value stream need to strive for in order to help the company move those measures in the right direction? And from there, you link the value stream goals to the strategic measurements. The next step, what will the value stream measure to understand if it is progressing towards those goals. One way I like to define a lean performance measurement is that you're measuring the distance from a goal or an objective. So for example, if you're trying to reduce lead times, you would want to measure the average lead time. If you want to increase throughput with the same resources, you want to have a measure sales per hour's work, which is productivity. So what you're doing now is you're saying, here are the 5 to 7 value stream measurements that if we move them all in the right direction, we will be working towards achieving the goals. And in turn, each value stream will be doing what it needs to do to move the strategic measurements in the right direction. The value stream measurements, you can look at those as the weekly measurements. The next step, you can define critical success factors at the cell level. What do the cells in the value stream need to do well all the time? So these are some examples. And again, you can connect them to the value stream measurements. Then you set the cell goals. What does the cell need? What does each cell in the value stream need to strive to do every single day? And then you link them, and then you create the value stream, the daily or hourly cell measures that are discrete in nature that help a cell understand is it achieving the daily or hourly goals? Is it focusing on the critical success factors? The interesting thing about doing the linkage chart process, and I'm going to explain sort of the steps in a second, is putting the arrows in. Okay, it's easy to identify the measures and the goals, but when you have a cross-functional team and you're starting to sort of connect the dots or using the arrows to connect, it creates a great deal of discussion in the team. And the other thing that a linkage chart does is it creates consensus across the entire company. All right, so how do you follow standard work for a linkage chart process? Think of it as a plan, do, check, adjust methodology. Okay, so the first thing is you want to use a cross-functional team. Okay, this is not just the senior leaders sitting around deciding what everybody needs to measure. Okay, you get a cross-functional team together. This helps create ownership, because operational leaders, they have a say in what the measures are. The other aspect of the plan is to use a Kaizen approach in terms of completing a linkage chart, calculating the measures, doing an initial how are we going to calculate the measure, and the actual deployment. Typically, when we work with a company, this is like a 2-day event, maybe a 3-day event. The do step is to pilot the measures. Okay, we want to make sure that, that the measures are effective. So we set a pilot period. Like if you're deploying daily measures, maybe 30 days. Weekly measures, you might want to look at them over 4 to 6 weeks. Monthly, 6 months. We're not going to change the measures. We're going to totally use them in the method that they're supposed to be used, which means we're going to display the measures. We're going to have the daily and weekly meetings. We're going to use the measures for problem solving. Okay, this is a learning experience for those that are using the measures. I highly recommend that there's some coach involved in this, because they have to learn, or a coach, a teacher, or a mentor. They may not figure this out on their own. And I've worked with enough companies where you sort of tell them, here's what you have to do, set the boards and do the meetings, run the try to do the root cause analysis, and if they don't have sort of some outside help to guide them along, to coach them, they sometimes sort of just fall back into the traditional habit of we're just reporting the numbers. So then, I'm sorry, this came out a little wrong. Let me just put it all up. So then the check is at the end of the pilot period. Are the measures effective? Are they identifying problems? Are they driving PDCA thinking? Are they simple and easy to use? What are these teams learning by using the measures? To tell you the truth, there is a chance that if you create the lean performance measurement system using the linkage chart, that there might be a few measures in there that are not effective. Maybe you just have to change the calculation a bit, but you'll know. As we said in practicing lean accounting, the acid test, if a lean performance measurement is effective, is basically, is it identifying problems and abnormalities that we need to work on improving or eliminating? And finally, you make the changes to the measures, or you sort of end the pilot, and the team has been developed in the methodology and they can run things on their own. Remember this pilot is a learning exercise. Okay, coaching is needed. All right, so let's do attendance check 3. We'll wrap things up and try to get to some questions. All right, so I'll give you about 10 more seconds. All right, thank you very much. All right. All right, so wrapping things up. It's important to assess your current measurement system. Do your current measures really help you understand lean operating performance? Typically, what companies find is there might be some that do, there might be some that don't. And this is where sort of the linkage chart process comes in, is to help you identify these gaps. So, what are the measures that we don't have? What are the relevant lean performance measurements we're missing? Mike explained, the sort of the 7 categories of measurements. Do we have a measure in each of those 7 categories? Or sometimes certain measures can be for more than one category at every level of the organization. Do we have daily measures? Do we have weekly measures? Do we have monthly measures? Okay, so understand the gaps, and the creation of new lean performance measures, use plan, do, check, adjust, as I just explained a few minutes ago, to pilot the measures and deploy them, and give people an opportunity to learn how to use them. You see there on the bottom, if you'd like a free 1-hour assessment of your measurement system, we'd be glad to do that for you. Just send either one of us an email, and we can create a Zoom meeting and with as many people as you want, and you can ask us our opinions on the your measurement system.
I think involving people in creating the measures and then using a PDCA approach, like you said, Nick, is really important. Early on, when we were deploying our measurement system, we had some ideas around what measures would be, and we took that cross-functional approach. But I was going to Gemba as a leader in my role, and I went to one of the clinics and basically asked the frontline team members, I see a lot of reds on the measurement board. What do those mean to you? And the response was, they don't mean anything to us. We don't know what to do with that. and I think that's not a criticism of anyone, but it's a good insight that, you know, the team had been living with that measure for a while. They found that they weren't able to learn and improve from that, but it was time for the local leader to be supported in a check adjust. You know, I don't think the local leader either, like Nick said, sometimes you need a coach. They may not have known how to adjust the measure, or they may not have felt empowered to adjust the measure. So, you know, don't switch it too soon. Like Nick said, you have to live with it for a while to really see what you can learn. But then if you have an ineffective measure for too long, it's just going to engage the frontline team, and you're not going to get the level of improvement you're striving for.
Yeah, great. We have a few minutes left to tackle some of the questions. What you see here is information about upcoming webinars. We have webinars scheduled every month. We haven't announced like the second quarter yet, the specific topics, but if you're on our mailing list, you'll be updated. We have a community chat. That's going to be Thursday, and this is how you register. And actually one reason why we're aligning the community chat in the same week as the webinar is that we're hoping that, you know, if you have extensive questions that you would like to answer in terms of the topic of the webinar, we can do that in the community chat. The community chat, though, is not limited to just performance measurement questions, but we think that it's easier for people to dive into the topic because it's been 2 days ago. Okay, a couple questions. This is a really good question. You know, prior to launch, should a problem-solving methodology be taught and practiced? Short answer is yes. You know, daily lean measures in a daily lean management system is a way to really teach the problem-solving methodology. Mike, did you want to add anything to that?
You're exactly right. Target actual gap. Now what? I mean, if we show folks that there's a gap to standard and they don't have a method for improvement, then again, there's the risk of just disengagement because folks are just going to be looking at red.
All right, so here's another question. I'll let you, Mike, take the first crack at it. It's about, you know, how do you compare the linkage chart process with Hoshin?
For us, it was directly connected. It was actually part of our Hoshin deployment to create, after we had come up with either, you know, the new or adjusted strategic goals and identified the key outcome measures. That deployment process included linking the outcomes down to frontline process measures so that there was clear alignment of what was happening at the front line, the daily activities and the daily improvement to the Hoshin. So for us, it was deeply connected.
Yeah, and there was another question about Hoshin and measures that, you know, do we ever use the X matrix methodology? That's a mouthful to say. The short answer is yes, and actually, one thing that we teach is that if you are using the X matrix methodology, the measures from the linkage chart should be the measures that are in there. We don't want to just have a linkage chart and then a whole set of separate measures on the X matrix. We want to try to integrate those as much as possible.
And it helps you get to what Nick said. What are the vital few? The X matrix is a way to identify the vital few measures.
Yeah. Another question, you know, the viewer came in late. You know, have we talked about how to measure when work cannot be completed in one sitting, such as picking something up, putting it down, waiting, and picking it up? And that's Joe. And Joe, I think we did address that with lead time. Okay, from the total time you start from the total time a process begins till the process ends. And lead time is really a combination of the actual value-added work time plus all the waste time. So that's how you would deal with that. Let's see. Okay. Somebody said something about, let's see, where do suggestions for improvement or number of accidents fit on performance measurements?
Number of accidents is a safety measure. It's an outcome we want to avoid.
Yeah.
Suggestions for improvement. Interesting. So that could be part of a continuous improvement measurement system. You could be saying, okay, folks are coming up with improvement ideas. Is that something that's worth counting? But I think the question is, what do we learn from counting that?
Yeah. And one thing about suggestions for improvement that I always talk about is it's better to measure number of improvements completed or improvements completed per person. It's not the suggestion, it's the actual work to solve the problem. Because the traditional suggestion box, anybody can suggest anything. But are they using the PDCA methodology to try to actually solve the problem? That's the way I look at that. Okay, we're at the top of the hour. Thank you very much for attending. Couple quick reminders. If you want a continuing education certificate, email me, I'll send them out. If you want a copy of the presentation and you haven't downloaded it, contact me. And hopefully we can see you at the community chat tomorrow and future webinars. And finally,
Thursday.
You will get a email in 24 hours that will have a link to the recording, and you can share that recording with anyone. So thanks for attending. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, guys.